You know what? I could talk about Baby Driver now because I did see it Saturday, right before the house, and it's one of my favorite movies of this year. But instead, let's get this out of the way. Let's get this overbloated mess out of the way. Let's talk about Transformers: The Last Night. So yes, there was a new Transformers movie that came out about 2 weeks ago now, I would say, right? Yeah, 2 weeks ago. Well, as I'm recording this video, it was 2 weeks ago. Now, to be honest, I could oversimplify this plot by just saying there's bad robots that want a staff with magical powers that Merlin used to have that was bestowed upon him by old knight Transformers. And if wielded in the wrong hands, this staff could destroy the world, and that's what they want, these bad robots want to do. And our hero from Age of Extinction, our Mark Wahlberg, our Jaeger, Jaeger's his last name, right? Is caught up into the middle of this and is the chosen one. Or is meant to find the staff along with the last remaining bloodline of Merlin. You know what, as wordy as that is still oversimplifying this plot. But I feel that wouldn't do it justice because this is an overblown, crazy, just messy plot. And I have to give you some understanding of what that's like. So here we go. Here is a semi-detailed summary of the plot. In Transformers: The Last Night, King Arthur, Merlin, the Knights of the Round Table, they exist. And they really happened. And so, as you'd expect any other Transformer movie, it starts off with backstory, and that's where it starts off with. Medieval times with King Arthur, his men. Merlin is not the same Merlin we think of. He's actually a drunk hack. But Merlin knows about an alien downed ship, which has a bunch of big robots that are big 12 Transformer knights. King Arthur and his men are trying to fight the Saxtons, and Merlin's like, hey, we need your Transformers' help. Transformers give him the staff, which is magical and is now Merlin's staff. The 12 knights transform into Mecha Ghidra, basically, which they call a dragon in this movie. And King Arthur, Merlin, his men, and the knights, the Transformer knights, all win the battle, and yay, yay, hurrah, everything's saved. Now let's jump ahead into the modern times. Optimus has left to find his creators. Well, he goes back to Cybertron, finds an evil lady Transformer that turns him to the dark side and proclaims that, hey, we need the Staff of Creation, we need to destroy the Transformer that is within Earth, Unicron. And you know what? If you saw this movie, completely missed that fact that there's a Transformer, that Earth itself is a Transformer at its core. If you missed that, I don't blame you, because I missed that too. There's a lot in this movie going on, and I completely didn't realize it until after the movie, after I heard a little bit more of an explanation of the end, slightly post-credits, and then thought back to some of the things that were said, and I'm like, oh, wow, there really is a Transformer inside Earth. Meanwhile, on Earth, Transformers, both Decepticons and Autobots, have been declared illegal. A new task force is assembled, and they're there to kill Autobots and Decepticons indiscriminately. Now jump in with our main character, Mark Wahlberg, Jaeger, the hero from the last movie. He's hiding out, he's a fugitive of the law because he's helping out all the Transformers, trying to bring them to some sort of safe haven in a big junkyard. So he's trying to help out as many Transformers as he can. He discovers this one older Transformer that's badly injured that is trying to give him a talisman. He decides, hey, you don't need to give me anything, I'm just trying to help you. Fails to help the Transformer, and the talisman follows him anyway. Turns out this talisman is a sign that the staff will be revealed, and it is a key to finding Merlin's staff. And when the Decepticons learn of this, they want the staff. When the task force learn from the Decepticons about the staff, they want to team up with the Decepticons just enough time for them to get the staff and then kill them so that they can get the staff. Everyone wants the staff. Throw in the mix that Anthony Hopkins' character is an old order that has kept the secrets of the Transformers, knows that Yeager knows that Mark Wahlberg is important because he has the talisman, because he is going to be the knight, and knows of the last remaining descendant of Merlin, and knows that only Merlin's bloodline can wield the staff. So he gets them together, and now they're off on an adventure. Meanwhile, Cybertron is coming to Earth, ready to get the staff, take the life out of Unicron within Earth, and destroy all life as we know it on Earth. Yes, that was a semi-detailed plot, because there's still other things that this movie mentions that I did not go into detail with that plot. Bunch of different side stories, but enough of that. Let's actually talk about the things that I like about the movie, which is a pretty small list. I feel there was a few people that still did a decent acting performance for Transformers. I like Anthony Hopkins in this movie because he's a little bit on the zany side, honestly, and he's able to handle it. See, he plays the character that not only narrates the film at the beginning and through most of the film, actually. He's also part of this order that knows what's going on, and he seems to be the only one or the only human that seems to have a clue and know exactly what's happening. But at that same time, he seems to be suffering from some form of dementia, along with all the robots that is around him as well. All the Transformers that are old and were from World War I and World War II, they all have some sort of robot dementia, just like Anthony Hopkins' character. And so he's prone to fits of rage and flipping people off and cursing. And there's something about that and the zaniness that Anthony Hopkins brings to that part of the role that, honestly, it was the only funny thing in the movie for me. I know if you think about it, we probably shouldn't be laughing because it's almost sort of making fun of this person who's losing his mind, basically. But at that same time, just Anthony Hopkins just cursing is somewhat funny. I have a feeling that I'm going through the same thing that people laughed at in Dirty Grandpa, where they're not laughing at the jokes. They're just laughing at the fact that Robert De Niro is saying some really crazy, dirty stuff. And so I guess I'm in that boat when it comes to Anthony Hopkins in this film. But honestly, it was probably one of the only characters I liked in the film. It's also nice seeing Josh Duhamel's character in this film again, because he was in the original three, or the three Michael Bay Transformers, the first three. And there's something about that character that I've always kind of liked and kind of rooted for. And for some reason, I always felt like I wished he was more of the main character of these films. And so having him in this movie again was pretty nostalgic, but I think this movie tries to go overboard with the nostalgia. I'll get a little bit more into that in the bad. And also kind of in the bad is they could have done a lot with this character. They could have done something really interesting and something conflicting, because he was a person that worked with the Autobots, that fought alongside the Autobots in the first three films. And now he's part of this task force that's there to kill any Transformer, whether they're Decepticon or Autobot. And so there should be some sort of conflicting nature with that, because he does admire Optimus Prime, and he does try to save Bumblebee and try to stop the fight with this task force at the beginning when Bumblebee and Mark Wahlberg are fighting with the task force at the beginning. And so they could have delved a little deep in this sort of character arc thing, but they don't really do much with it at all. It's just sort of, he's just with the task force doing this mission, and then by the end when Optimus Prime actually comes to the movie, then he's like, oh, we gotta save Optimus, and then suddenly they're all band together with the Autobots. It's just, they do like no sort of build up to that and no sort of conflict at all. But honestly, the only person I feel that actually gave a damn and tried to do their best in their acting performance is the girl that we saw in the trailers. Remember the trailer where it's trying to show that, oh, we're progressive now, and oh, we're not objectifying women, and oh, look, we're going to have a strong female character lead. The little girl that has a really cheesy, really force-fed speech about fighting like a girl. Yeah, that was kind of cringeworthy because I'm all for equality. That's not the issue. It's the issue that this was a series that's like, we know that we've had troubles with women and people complaining about, oh, you're just objectifying women and all that kind of stuff and some sexist stuff. And so we're like, okay, we're going to try to do the opposite and try to force feed this strong lead character for you. That was like the cringiest trailer ever. But anyway, I feel that this little girl, Isabella Moner, or Moner. Yeah, she is the only one that feels like she's trying to act in this film. And she's pretty damn good. I honestly want to see her in another movie. Problem is, in this movie, they don't do anything with her character. Yeah, you know that trailer where it's like, oh, we're going to show a strong female lead, and look at this kid, this is going to be one of our main characters. Nope. She's not even in half of the movie. I'll get into that a little bit later, but at least she did her best performance, and it was the best performance in the entire movie. Other good things I can say about this film, the action is pretty well handled. Look, Michael Bay knows how to do an action sequence. He knows how to do really good explosions. And this one's a little bit more toned down. Not as toned down as the first Transformers movie. But out of all the Transformers movies, this is probably the most consistent at, okay, I know what's happening in the action. Now granted, I might not be the best judge of that because I never was confused with any of the other action sequences of the Transformers movies, of a Michael Bay film. I feel that I can follow the action pretty damn well. But this one felt like, without a shadow of a doubt, you can follow the action, and it is pretty damn choreographed and some really good action sequences in this movie that is good and handled well. He knows how to handle big set pieces and crazy action stunts, and he's just as you'd expect in this movie. And I also have to say that the CGI and the Transformers, sometimes they look really damn realistic. Actually, for the most part, they look pretty damn realistic and looked good. In fact, I'd have no problem saying that it may not be the best CGI I've seen all year so far, but it's definitely within the top 10. Like, I can probably think of maybe only 5 or 6 more this year so far. I haven't looked at the list for a while, but there's probably about 5 or 6 more that I feel are better CGI quality than Transformers The Last Night, but it's up there. There's only a few cartoony moments that I felt were unrealistic, and that's usually when they're dealing with the humans among Transformers. Like, there's a big Transformer fight and Mark Wahlberg has to jump on Optimus Prime, and that looked a little bit fakey when it was pulled back. And there's a part where Mark Wahlberg has to jump on these flying robots and sort of skip across them, and that looked pretty fake. Plus, the camera work and the music is just as you'd expect for a Michael Bay film, and is pretty good. And while the story itself is overbloated, it's filled with a lot of unnecessary things to convolute it and make it more complicated than it should be. Even though there are moments in the story where I just question, why are you doing this? Why did it have to be this way? Couldn't you have condensed it in a different way? Or couldn't you have done this instead? Even though I'm constantly questioning the story in that direction, this is much more of a cohesive story than the last film, than Age of Extinction. Age of Extinction felt like 2 stories in one, where it starts off as one story, leads into a totally different story, and then ends with the first story. With 2 major bad guys, 2 major conflicts, and one of them is completely forgotten about. In this one, there is a clear-cut bad guy, there is clear-cut things. It doesn't feel like two stories or two major stories in one. There's a lot of side plots, there's a lot of extra things that don't need to be in this movie, but it feels more like one story than two. So yeah, that's all I can say good about the film. Now on to the bad. First off, let's start with Mark Wahlberg. I think he's good. I like him in a lot of stuff. I think he's really great in the right movie. And there's some movies where I feel that he's the best in that movie. For this one, I almost got a little bit of reminiscence of The Happening, with the high-pitched voice at times. And there's moments where his line delivery reminded me of The Happening. That's just enough to make him one of the worst performances in this movie, just those tiny bits of moments. But it's not mainly his acting that I'm complaining about. Honestly, I didn't like his character. I liked his character in Age of Extinction. But in this one, he feels a little bit more... he feels more like a jerk. There's something about his character in this movie that rubs me the wrong way. I'm just like, I don't care about this main character. He feels like a douchebag. Despite the fact that there's many actions that he does that tries to paint him as a hero and shows that he does care. So it almost tries to paint him as this tough guy, this guy that doesn't get involved with other people, that doesn't want to connect with other people, sort of this bad boy persona on the outside who has a big heart and actually cares about things and is actually a noble hero on the inside. Like, it almost feels like the movie tries to go in that direction, but it almost feels like the movie itself doesn't know that that's the direction it's trying to take, if that makes any sense. Like, there's hints and parts of it that feel like, oh, maybe this scene it was trying to do that, but overall arc, no. And so ultimately I just didn't care about his character and didn't believe him to be the noble knight hero that he's supposed to be in the film. So since we're on the subject of characters, let's continue on with some of the characters that are either underutilized or shouldn't even be in this film in the first place. So we talked about the actress Isabella, who plays Isabella in this movie. Like I said, the one strong female lead character that they tried to emphasize in that trailer. Yeah, she barely does anything in this movie. She is one of the first characters introduced once it gets to the modern world, because it starts off with these group of, it's 4 kids, right? Yeah, it's 4 kids that sneak into this destroyed Chicago area that's all fenced off. And they're like, oh, no humans are supposed to be in here. This is where some of these Transformers are hiding out. And so these kids are like, oh, we just want to see the destroyed area. So they go in and they're saved by the girl and her robot companions, one of which is a small one, Squeaks I think it's called, and then the other one is Canopy, which is an Autobot, which I thought it was Bumblebee in the trailer, but it's this other Autobot. Anyway, something bad happens and Mark Wahlberg saves them all, and then she sort of hitchhikes with Mark Wahlberg's character. Action sequence later on, and then Mark Wahlberg has to be taken away to England, and so then we don't see her character again until the final end. And so you're thinking, okay, well, maybe she does something awesome in the climax. Maybe she's important to the battle. Nope. All she does is tags along. That's the main thing that this girl does in this movie. She tags along and sort of stowaway. Yeah, she's a stowaway through the entire film. She just sneaks onto vehicles and vessels and planes just so she can be in the action, and then does nothing with the action. Is not a part of the action. She's just there. So if you were hoping, hey, this is going to be Michael Bay's first strong female lead character in a Transformers movie, nope. So let's talk about some characters that are completely useless for this film. There's one character that is the comic relief and sort of Mark Wahlberg's sidekick in this movie, and I don't know why he's in this movie at all. The only thing that he does in the movie is he watches the Autobots while Mark Wahlberg is gone, but maybe you could have taken him out of the picture and maybe just have one of the Autobots responsible enough to watch after each other. Like, they just need this comic relief character so he can complain and moan about having to watch these Autobots that don't know what to do and just rampage and just destroy. And he tags along in some action sequences and all he does is complain and become the comic relief. It's kind of like if T.J. Miller was this character. It's kind of like Age of Extinction. Let's say T.J. Miller is this sidekick, to give you some example of what this is like. Let's just say T.J. Miller tagged along and he didn't die in that action sequence. But then something happened that caused Mark Wahlberg to split off with the team, and so they stuck around somewhere else. Mark Wahlberg goes on his own adventure, and then when it comes to the final climax, T.J. Miller and all of them join up with Mark Wahlberg again, and then T.J. Miller is not in any of the action sequences and does nothing. That's kind of like the comic relief character in this movie. Like, he's not even part of the conflict. He just shows up with the Autobots. It's like, hey, I brought all these Autobots here. Which he didn't really bring them there. They came themselves. And he just tagged along. And then he just doesn't go in the helicopter with the big climax because he's not an action person. And then do we even see him again at the end of the movie? I don't even remember. There's that character. And then there's a character that first witnesses Cybertron coming towards Earth. And yeah, I know we have these disaster movies where some scientist or this astronomer or someone spots the impending doom. We have that kind of character in disaster movies. And sometimes those characters can be important and it's like, hey, we gotta warn people, and then he becomes the person that understands what's gonna happen and becomes the big lead, the big scientist. They have that kind of character in this movie, and they don't even need it for this Transformers movie. All he does is complain and say, hey, we shouldn't be talking about magic and hobgoblins. I believe in physics. Listen to me. We're going to use physics to destroy this planet. And all he does is causes the climax of the film to become more bloated and longer because he does something to start this other attack, which does nothing but make it more complicated for the people that are actually doing the work and actually stopping the conflict. Agent Simmons, I think it was Agent Simmons, John Turturro, yeah. He's in it again. He's in Cuba, and the only reason he's in it is to add more nostalgia to the film, because all he does is sort of give hints to Anthony Hopkins' character of something which they could have done in a better way where they didn't need Simmons. Like, you could have completely condensed it and found some other way for Anthony Hopkins' character to figure out what the purpose of Stonehenge is. But they're like, hey, Agent Simmons was a character from the other films. Let's throw him in this one again. Oh, and if you thought Optimus Prime was going to be the main bad guy and then they're going to have this final conflict where they bring him back to the light side, yeah, that happens for the last 40 minutes of the film. The movie is about 2.5 hours long. Optimus Prime doesn't show up on Earth itself until the last 40-minute mark. So all he really has is the fight with Bumblebee, and then he gets snapped out of it, like, immediately. Speaking of Bumblebee, there's something that's always bugged me with these later films. After number 1, Bumblebee got his voice fixed, right?
Permission to speak, sir.
Permission granted, old friend.
You speak now?
I wish to stay with the boy.
If that is his choice.
Yes.
I distinctly remember him getting his voice fixed, but after every other movie after the first one, he still has no voice fixed. Like, what? Now, I know that the Transformers isn't big on continuity, because there's a lot of continuity errors just with the beginning of each film, where they completely change the backstory of how the Transformers came to Earth. But come on, there's a moment where him actually using his voice is the one thing that snaps Optimus Prime out of his evil state. And he's like, I haven't heard your voice since the fall of Cybertron.
Permission to speak, sir.
Permission granted, old friend.
You speak now?
Dude, you heard his voice at the end of the first film. And even so, there's no reason in this movie that his voice was fixed. Because they give him this voice which isn't his voice, so he takes it out, and then he just suddenly talks. I guess it's magic. Because it's a fantasy version of Transformers. Which is probably why they call this one butler robot Leprechaun all the time, because he's short. I mean, there's no reason why you would mistake him as a Leprechaun. He's not green. He's not Irish. He looks like C-3PO. He's a robot. The only thing is he's short. That's it. Maybe it's like, oh, we're more of a fantasy movie in this one, so we gotta have fantasy elements, so let's call him a Leprechaun. So that was his nickname from all the humans in this movie. Well, all the American humans, the Mark Wahlberg and the comic relief guy, who I don't even know the name of, and Isabel. And the comedic moments of this film, the moments where it's supposed to be a joke, is supposed to be funny, is just so immature, so lowbrow, that it's just embarrassing to all the actors that have to say these lines. The only things that made me actually laugh out of all the jokes, and it's spitfire, rapid jokes. There's so many comic reliefs in this movie that every scene has a joke, pretty much. But the only things that made me laugh in the movie were whenever Anthony Hopkins went into crazy mode, talking about stuff and cursing. There's this one part where he's talking about his relative, and he's like, oh, this girl was mad, and blah, 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 and yeah, oh, and she was a bitch. Or when they go to this submarine and all these tourists are there because it's a museum site. Well, this submarine's a transformer. They need to use this to go into the ocean. And so he's like, okay, this museum is closed indefinitely. And so he runs up to all these tourists still taking pictures. And so he gets in their face and he's just screaming. And when all the older English ladies, the ones that are apparently responsible for raising the main girl that is the descendant of Merlin, I forget her name. She's supposed to be a smart character, but at the same time, she looks like Megan Fox. She has that same type, and she's just like any of the other Michael Bay characters in a Transformers movie, all the female characters. I mean, she's just like Megan Fox, and then the other girl in Dark of the Moon, pretty much. There's these older ladies that take care of her, and they're like, oh, you need a man and stuff. They're like, oh, you need to get a date, and you need to get a man, and all that kind of stuff. And so when she brings Mark Wahlberg over, because they have to look through her father's study, and they start taking all this stuff down, and they're like searching for some sort of clue to where the staff might be. They're saying things that are out of context, and the older women are like, oh, they're having sex up there. Oh, it's like having Tarzan in the house. There was something kind of funny about that. Oh, and it's actually kind of weird, too, thinking about it, because there's this almost post-apocalyptic feel when it comes to certain sections of this film. Plus, you have this whole town that Mark Wahlberg and the comic relief and Isabella and all the Autobots run to sort of a safe haven if the Decepticons or the task force ever find them, and so they lay traps. And it's this like deserted town that looks like part of a post-apocalyptic area, and there's homeless people there. Heck, there's this one action sequence, they're running into this building while crazy stuff is happening, and in that whole moment, this is what kind of feels like a post-apocalyptic feel, is there's this one random homeless person just sweeping the floor in the background as they're running from this chaotic moment in this deserted town. There's something post-apocalyptic feel to that. Yet the whole rest of the world is completely fine, and England is completely intact, and people are worrying about, oh, you need a man and stuff, and government is still going fine, and all this. It's like, decide whether you want post-apocalyptic or not post-apocalyptic. Oh god, and the Decepticons of this movie. Okay, so one of the stupid things, one of the things I'm just questioning, why does this even happen in the movie? The task force, the same task force that is willing to kill any Autobot as well as Decepticon, is hearing about this possible talisman that could lead to a staff that Yeager has, that Mark Wahlberg has. And they only know this because they overheard or bugged a conversation with two of the Decepticons, one of which is Megatron, the other is Barricade, you know, the police cruiser that was in the first film that is a Transformer. Speaking of which, that scene was kind of baffling to me because there's a moment where Megatron is mad at Barricade and he uses his flamethrower to just burst a fire, just this stream of fire, and it's just goes and then it goes again, and then and it's just, he does it like 3 or 4 times, and like the first 2 is completely fine because he's still angry at that point, but then he's no longer angry and he still shoots fire like twice, like not out of anger, that's just like just random, and it's just so weird. It's just, something is weird about that scene. But anyway, they overhear the conversation about this talisman that could lead to a staff, and the staff could be bad in the wrong hands, and they're like, oh, we need to get that staff. But instead of getting Yeager themselves, or having Yeager work for them, or helping him find the talisman, or any number of logical things, they're like, oh, let's have a talk with Megatron. Let's make a deal with Megatron. Help him bring out some of his other Decepticon buddies. Have him go after Yeager. And then once they get the talisman from him, then we can double cross the Decepticons and take it for ourselves. The stupidest plan in the entire movie, almost the most stupid. No, probably the stupidest plan in this entire movie. But the weirdest thing is, they have some Decepticon buddies of Megatron in custody. The same task force that is willing to kill Autobots that have helped them in the past, just completely murder them on the spot, for some reason have captured Decepticons and are keeping them in jail during a point when all Transformers are illegal on Earth, except in Cuba, which is weird. Decepticons in jail, and so Megatron's like, I need some of my boys busted out, I need them. Okay, we can make a deal with you, who do you want? I want this person. Then it shows that person, and in bold letters like a heist movie, it shows that character's name, Mohawk, and it introduces him, almost Suicide Squad style. It was like, okay, you can have that. Name another one. I want this one. And then so it goes down the line, like 5 or 6 of them, introducing them. And you know what happens? I think they all die in the next scene. So that was a good chunk of our time wasted, Michael Bay, or whoever decided to do that. Oh, and this is also a movie that has so much cursing in it that it probably should be rated R. Like, I know PG-13 movies can get away with saying the F word twice anymore, and you're automatically rated R. And I think they only say it twice in this movie, but it could almost be argued that maybe it said it 3 times, because one of them is so jumbled and robotic-like that you can't tell, but you know exactly what it means. Plus, there's all these robots saying mofo, and it's just like, combined with the jumbled up FU, with all the mofos, plus the actual FUs, that's probably like 10 in this movie. Plus the tonal shifts in this movie. There are moments where it is dark, it is action-packed. Like, just the opening scene alone, I can comment, where it is King Arthur and he's in this terrible battle, him and his men. There are catapults and explosions and people getting stabbed and spiked on pikes. Like this terrible, brutal battle, and like, we need Merlin, and like, Merlin's not here yet, and we need Merlin, and this one person like, oh God, it's the end of times, it's the end of times, it's the end of all we know. And one's like, well, why do you trust Merlin? You know he's just a drunk. The next thing you know, shows Merlin as Stanley Tucci, or Stanley Tucci as Merlin. Suddenly stops his horse, he's like, oh, I need a drink. And starts drinking. I mean, it's not as bad as that, but it's almost like that with the tonal shift. There are so many moments where it gets epic and it tries to be serious, and it changes only to add in another joke. Now you can argue, well, that's what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 did, but that's more of a parody and more of a satire and more of a comedy, and so you expect that. And the importance, the graphic nature, the seriousness versus the immature jokes in this movie is such a shift that it's really just annoying. And it's constantly doing this. Heck, even the narration at the beginning of the film with Anthony Hopkins, when after he explains the whole Arthur stuff, he's like, gets back to the modern world, he's like, Autobots have been declared illegal and there's a task force there to eliminate them. And he's talking about all these dire things. Optimus Prime has left us. Says all that, and then all of a sudden he says something like, oh, except for Cuba, where all the Transformers can sunbathe in the sand, in the beaches. Just random. Heck, I can think of another one. Anthony Hopkins explaining the story of Arthur and Merlin to both Mark Wahlberg's character and the female lead in this movie, not Isabel, the British girl, explaining all of this exposition, and then all of a sudden this music starts getting more epic, and then suddenly Anthony Hopkins stops and is like, Cogsworth, what are you doing? And you find out that the robot is playing on the, I forgot the frickin' instrument's name now. I don't know why I forgot it. But he's playing and he's making this epic music. He's like, I just wanted to make it more dramatic. And then Anthony Hopkins is like, just shut up. And so he continues with his narration, with his exposition. And suddenly you hear more epic music again. You hear this opera voice. Turns out it's the freaking robot again. And he's doing that and Anthony Hopkins is like, shut up. So then he continues the exposition. And then you get music again. But it's not from the robot. And it's just like any of the other music that the robot was saying. It's just, this is the actual music of the film now. It's, fuck. Heck, there's a whole scene almost dedicated to just talking about, almost a whole scene, just dedicated to Mark Wahlberg's character's sex life and how he's chaste. And how long has it been since he's had sex. This is the kind of thing the movie does. Constantly. But you want to know one of the most... I mean, this is one of those films where I can probably go on and on about talking about it. And so one of these days, when it comes out on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, I'm probably going to do a longer review and pinpoint all the bad things in this movie, or all the good things and bad things that I thought about this movie. But there's one more thing that I have to talk about, and it was probably the most annoying thing in the movie. It's one of those things that if you notice it, once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. I don't know if it's like this in the 3D version. I saw the 2D version. I've seen a few other YouTube reviewers also mention this. The aspect ratio in this movie constantly changes. And it's not like It Comes at Night, where the aspect ratio change is stylistic and meaningful. It feels like that some cameras had a certain aspect ratio while other cameras didn't in the scene. And they're like, oh, shoot, we didn't have two different cameras for different aspect ratios. We're going to have to edit this in, despite the fact that it's constantly changing. There are scenes where it's not epic or anything. It's just conversations between two people. And one camera is in a specific aspect ratio while the others aren't. The others are different ones, and so you've got like 4 cameras set up, right? And you have to edit these shots together to make a scene. Well, like the overview shot is completely fine. The shot with one person's face, like a close-up of one person's face, totally fine. But the close-up of the other person's face, totally different aspect ratio. And so whenever it cuts to a close-up of that person's face, you start seeing the bars, then they go away, then you see the bars, then they go away, then you see the bars, then they go away, then you're constantly in the scene. Almost every freaking scene. Boom, 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 boom. Almost every cut. Once you notice it, and you constantly notice it, it's all you see and all you focus on, and it gets headache-inducing and annoying. I mean, it's not as bad as Resident Evil The Final Cut, where it just chops all over the place to split-second cuts. But the aspect ratio constantly changing and constantly seeing the bars, not seeing the bars, and seeing the bars, not seeing the bars, seeing the bars, just sometimes half a second at a time. It's just as headache-inducing. Even though there are things that I like in The Last Night more than Age of Extinction, honestly, overall experience is worse than Age of Extinction. But it's going to get about the same score. I'm going to give Transformers The Last Night 1.5 stars. It could almost be a 2 if it wasn't for some of the more annoying things in this movie. So, did you see Transformers The Last Night? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015, 2016, or 2017. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.